This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. You can visit their store by using my referral link in the description below. Hi everyone, I'm Nitsahone, and it's time for another MTG Top 10, the series where I rank cards based on their historical performance at Magic's highest level of competition. Today, we're going to take a look at Tempest. Tempest was released on October 14th, 1997, and it was the first set in Tempest block. It is considered one of the best sets in the history of the game by many players, especially those that were playing when it was released. As we'll see in this top 10, it certainly has a claim at being a very good set, but I think calling it one of the best ever, at least when talking about the history of competitive Magic, is probably overstating things a little bit. This isn't the first time I've looked at Tempest, but it has been a very long time since the last time I did. I looked at it the first time back in February 2017 in what was only the 38th MTG Top 10. Now that we're more than 6 years and 600 episodes later, I thought it would be worth revisiting, especially because I just finished up looking at the Mirage block sets last month, so now we can move into Tempest block with a fresh look at its first set. That original list has much lower video quality across the board, so it feels good to put an updated version of it out there. As you can probably guess, the cards on this list didn't change nearly as much as they tend to on other updated MTG Top 10s. This is because, obviously enough, there haven't been any new Tempest cards printed. However, the order of the list has changed dramatically, and it does have two newcomers on it. To be eligible for this list, a card had to receive its original printing in Tempest. In all, that means there were 299 cards eligible for the video, and in it, we're going to take a look at the 10 that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic. Before we get started, here's a quick reminder on how I score cards in these videos. A first tier top 8 is worth 2 points, this includes events like Pro Tours, and a second tier top 8 is worth 1 point. This includes events like Regional Championships. Before we get to the list proper, let's take a look at the two cards that made the list last time, but didn't make it this time. Starting with Parish, which was at number 9 last time. For 2 generic and a black, Parish is a sorcery that destroys all green creatures and prevents them from regenerating. This kind of color-hate effect was pretty common in Magic in the 1990s and early 2000s, and obviously against the right opponent, Parish can be a one-sided Wrath of God. This made it a useful sideboard card for quite some time, and it still sees a little bit of play in Legacy today, gaining 2 points there over the last 6 years, but now it takes 49 points to crack this top 10, so it was nowhere close. It won't find its way back on the list in the future either. Fanatic is the other card to lose its spot on the list, and it took quite the tumble from its number 5 position. Like I said in the intro, the cards on this list haven't changed that much, but the order has. Some of the cards on it have gained a crazy number of points over the last 6 years, and Fanatic is a casualty as a result. For 1 red mana, the Fanatic is a 1/1 that can sacrifice itself to do 1 damage to a creature or player. The Fanatic was once one of the best 1-drops in Magic, but it eventually got nerfed by a big rule change. In its heyday, combat damage used the stack. This meant you could block something with the Fanatic, put the 1 damage from the Fanatic's power on the creature it's blocking, and then also sacrifice the Fanatic to do an additional 1 damage. This meant the Fanatic could easily take down X2s, or 2 1/1s, but eventually the rules changed so that damage doesn't use the stack, and Fanatic came out of it on the other end as a much less powerful card. It's still a 1-mana 1/1 that can sacrifice itself to kill something small, but that's just not nearly as good. In block and standard, it was played in decks like Sly and Red Deck Wins, and he was played in similar decks in extended. In addition to your usual red aggro decks, burn decks, and zoo decks, the Fanatic was also played in goblin decks. All of this allowed it to amass a lot of points in those formats for a long time. He was even good enough for Legacy Goblins, putting up a few points there. So it's really sad that this became so much worse when the rules changed, and that's a big part of why it hasn't gained any points in a very long time, but hey, at least he'll always have his memories. Alright, let's move to the list proper now, starting with the number 10 card, Grindstone, which is a complete newcomer to the list. For 1 mana, Grindstone is an artifact that you can pay 3 generic mana for and tap to mill 2 cards from target player's library. Then if the 2 cards that got milled share a color, you repeat the process. Grindstone was not a card that was played very much during its early history. That's part of why it was unable to make the list last time over cards like Fanatic and Parish, which saw a ton of play in their heyday. While it did appear as a win condition in a couple of block-constructed control decks that were played at Worlds back in 1998, neither of them top-8'd the event, and Grindstone didn't actually gain its first point until 2008, more than 10 years after Tempest was released. This is because a newly printed card made it so Grindstone could mill the opponent out in a single activation and in the extreme early game. That card is, of course, Painter's Servant. This little scarecrow lets you make every card in every zone the same color, so a single Grindstone activation mills out your opponent's entire deck. Ever since Painter's Servant showed up, Painter combo decks have been a fixture in Legacy, while enjoying more sporadic success in Vintage. It's going to keep gaining points at a pretty nice clip, and in the long run it will likely pass some of the less active cards in front of it that are still on the list largely as a result of past glory, and not because of what they're doing right now. One of those cards is our number 9 card, which is Cursed Scroll, which was at number 4 last time. Like Grindstone, this artifact costs 1 mana, and you can pay 3 mana and tap it for an activated ability. In the case of the scroll, you name a card and reveal a card at random from your hand. If the card you reveal has the chosen name, the scroll does 2 damage to any target. When you first read this card, it seems pretty bad. What if you reveal the wrong card? I mean, sometimes it might not do anything, right? Well, that would be true if the scroll wasn't utilized in really aggressive decks in Block, Standard, Extended, and even Legacy. These decks would curve out and do a lot of damage, as aggro decks often do, and Cursed Scroll gave the deck a way to finish the opponent off in the late game. If you're curving out, you're usually going to be in top deck mode. At that point, you only have 1 card, and you can just name it every turn and burn the opponent out. To reference a more recent aggro deck, it was a lot like Ramunap Ruins, in that it made it pretty impossible for opponents to stabilize against aggro decks, as they always had free damage lying around on the board. Ramunap Ruins is a card that got banned out of Standard, and Cursed Scroll got banned in Block Constructed for pretty much the same reason. It maintained legality in both Standard and Extended, where it was merely really good, and it has seen sporadic play in Legacy over the years too. That's the format where it's gained 2 points since 2017. Both of them came in a Pox deck, a prison deck that goes after the opponent's resources to shut them down, and the scroll is one of the deck's win conditions. It probably isn't entirely done gaining points, but it's definitely done gaining them with regularity, and Grindstone will definitely be passing it in the near future. At number 8, it's Intuition, which has fallen 5 spots over the last 6 years. This instant costs 2 generic and a blue, and it lets you search your library for 3 cards and reveal them to your opponent. Your opponent chooses one of them, and you put the other 2 into your graveyard. In other words, it's a very roundabout sort of tutor. It doesn't have a restriction where you have to grab cards with different names, so you can choose to simply search up 3 cards with the same name. You can also search up cards that are going to be great for you, whether they're in your graveyard or your hand, making your opponent's decision trivial. It has seen a lot of success in 60-card formats over its long history, often showing up in combo decks that could use it to find the key pieces for their combo. It's played this role the most prominently in Extended and Legacy, with the card really experiencing its most productive period between 1998 and 2005. These days, it does still see regular play in Legacy Show and Tell decks, where it can help you either find your big scary win condition or Show and Tell itself. It's going to keep gaining points in Legacy going forward. At number 7, it's Reanimate, which like Grindstone is a newcomer to the list. True to its name, Reanimate is the most efficient reanimation spell in the entire game. For a single black mana, it can bring a creature back from either graveyard. The only downside is that you lose life equal to the mana value of that creature. Still, if you can quickly load your graveyard, Reanimate can bring a huge monster back in the extreme early game. For a very long time, it has been one of the most commonly played reanimation spells in Legacy. One of the ways to get around this downside is to bring back cards that gain you life, like Gristlebrand, Atraxa, or Archon of Cruelty. You can also play it alongside Death's Shadow, which loves it when your life total is really low, because it becomes absolutely massive. It's going to keep gaining points in Legacy going forward. At number 6, it is Reflecting Pool, which has fallen 4 spots since 2017. It's a land that can tap for 1 mana of any type that a land you control could produce. While this means it isn't great at fixing all on its own, if you have a good mana base, it tends to make it even better. It's pretty sweet to run alongside cards like Gemstone Mine, City of Brass, or Undiscovered Paradise, which can give you mana of any color, with a downside, because that means Reflecting Pool is a better version of those cards. One reason it has as many points as it does is because it had 2 separate runs through Block, Standard, and Extended. The first time as a result of this Tempest printing, of course, and the second time a result of a reprint in Shadowmoor 10 years later. That Shadowmoor reprint also makes it legal in Modern, unlike almost every other card on the list. But even with all of that going for it, it's only gained 15 points over the last 6 years, leading to its precipitous fall down the list, and it's likely to fall farther in the future. At number 5, it's Choke, which was at number 7 last time. It stops islands from untapping during their controller's untap steps. In other words, it's a card that can really shut down blue decks. Since being printed in Tempest, it's been a very common sideboard card in all the formats it's been legal in, apart from Vintage. There simply isn't a more efficient way to shut down blue decks in most formats, and as a result it's amassed an impressive score over the years. Basically, as long as there are blue decks in Modern and Legacy, Choke is going to keep gaining points. At number 4, it is Diabolic Edict, which was at number 10 last time. For one generic and a black, this instant is, well, an edict. In other words, it makes a player sacrifice a creature. This card is why we call this type of effect an edict. This offers some very efficient removal at 2 mana, but it does get a little worse the more creatures your opponent has, as getting rid of anything other than their best creature doesn't tend to be that impressive. It was used some as a generic removal spell, but it's done most of its work in Legacy as a result of being great in the metagame. A large percentage of Legacy decks just want to cheat one big win condition into play with reanimation spells or show and tell or sneak attack, and the Edict can deal with all of them with no questions asked, whether they are indestructible or hexproof or anything else. While it starts in the sideboard for some decks, it sees plenty of main deck play in the format too, and as long as people are looking to win games with one big creature, Diabolic Edict is going to keep gaining points in Legacy. At number 3, it's Lotus Pedal, which was at number 8 last time. This 0 mana artifact can be tapped and sacrificed to produce 1 mana of any color. Basically, it's 1/3 of Black Lotus, and it's a pretty insane card. A free mana boost is a big deal in basically every format, especially for combo decks that can go off a full turn earlier. This was especially problematic with combo decks during the so-called combo winter, a period between December 1998 and March of 1999 that was an era of competitive Magic where almost every format was dominated by combo decks. Lotus Pedal was one of the many cards that were banned in multiple formats to put an end to combo insanity. It's actually still restricted in Vintage today, where the one copy does see a ton of play, but it has since been unbanned in Legacy, where it's a fixture in Storm decks. Believe it or not, Lotus Pedal is also a common, and an incredibly powerful one that sees plenty of play in Pauper 2, a format where only commons are legal. It's going to continue to gain a ton of points, but the 2 cards in front of it are still so incredibly active, and they have a much higher score, so Lotus Pedal's probably never going to do better than number 3. At number 2, it's Ancient Tomb, which was at number 6 last time. This is a land that can tap for 2 mana, and it does 2 damage to you. Part of the reason its score has gone up this much, and this is true of a lot of the cards that have found success in the Eternal formats, is because I didn't used to do as good of a job as accounting for those formats. These days they use a broader number of events for cards, and now Legacy and Vintage are actually reflected. This is the clearest with Ancient Tomb, which has an absurd 355 more points than it had back in 2017. Anyway, as you know, if you've played this or similar cards, the damage is well worth the impressive mana boost. Over the years, it has done work in virtually every format, but it sees play in a wide variety of decks in all those formats too, especially in decks that look to take advantage of one huge turn to win the game, like combo decks and Reanimator. This gets you to that turn a full turn earlier, and the downside doesn't matter much, since the turn it gives you will often determine the outcome of the game. It sees play in a ton of other decks too, though, including aggro decks. It's pretty much a staple. So it sees an incredible amount of play in the Eternal formats, and that's not going to change anytime soon. And at number 1, it's Wasteland, which was at number 1 last time. It's the 3rd non-basic land to make the list. This is a land that can tap for colorless, or you can tap it and sacrifice it to destroy a non-basic land. Non-basic lands are very heavily played in the Eternal formats, and those are the only formats Wasteland is legal in these days. While Strip Mine obviously outshines it, that card is banned in Legacy and restricted in Vintage, while you can play a full 4 of Wastelands in both Legacy and Vintage. This is a great way to disrupt mana bases, especially if you can recur it with something like Ren and 6, which ultimately got banned out of Legacy largely because it interacted so powerfully with Wasteland. Like Ancient Tomb, Wasteland is pretty much a staple in the Eternal formats, and as a result, it's just going to keep adding to its score. So those are the top 10 cards from Tempest. If you want to own any of these super powerful cards, check out the description where you can find a direct Card Kingdom link for each card that appeared in the video. If you want to make sure you catch future videos, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. If you want to catch up on past videos, including many more that look at individual sets, you should see a playlist on your screen shortly. And if you want to go the extra mile in supporting me and the channel, you can do that by becoming a channel member or a patron. You can find ways to do those things in the description. Thanks for watching.